Hello and welcome to episode 77 of The Imperial Truth. I'm Greg. Joining me as always is Neil.
Hi Greg.
Hi Neil, how are you doing?
Yeah, not bad, you?
Yeah, struggling through. Before we go anywhere, let us talk Element Games. As usual, all the same stuff. Shadespire came out this weekend, so that's £32 there. Yeah, the 20% off. When you say it's £32 down from 40, you know, that's a cracking price. And usually get your stuff on the Saturday of the release as well, which is really good. In some cases, before the shops are even open. But that all depends on your postman.
Yeah, if you've got a good posting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've got a few bits to tack on as well. As all of a sudden, it's really easy to get your order up to £80 when you're a hobbyist, isn't it? It's like, well, I need that paint. I might as well get this, and I might as well get that. And all of a sudden, you've got 140 quid in your thing. You're like, I only wanted to spend 80. But yeah, free postage on everything over 80. And of course, you get your rewards as well. So if you put in your element code, or someone else's element code, should I say, you get double rewards on that as well. And we always put the link up and go through the show notes for supporting the show. Let them know we sent you.
Indeed.
And they've got their event still as well. In November, the competitive heresy event. So go check it out. You can go into Element. There's a section for events, and you can find it there. They've still got. It's still going to take submissions for that as well. So if you want to go and play a bit more hardcore heresy, which some people do, you want to get your big toys out and not have to worry about whether you're balancing the game, then rock on up there with all your custodes and knights and what have you. and Magnus.
Do you think there'll be a lot of that there? Do you think it was the
I've no idea, to be honest.
Versus
it's a really interesting thing. I was talking to Ben, who helped set up the pack, about it, and I'm like, I don't know how it will go down. I kind of like it. I like the fact it's there. I like the fact that if you do sometimes feel like you want to let loose, there's a place to go and do it. And if it was closer, I'd be tempted, I think. And if you own Magnus, you know, how many times are you going to get to unleash a full Magnus? You know, you're always going to be going, well, I won't choose this power, I won't choose that power. But you can just be like, yeah, I'm Invisible Magnus, baby. Or I've got Strength D coming out of every part of me. You know, and you can take your knights and you can run your knights without the fear of coming up against someone who hasn't got an army designed to deal with them and things like that. So it potentially has a place. And I know certain listeners and certain people who used to work for GW, it's kind of abhorrent to them to play the heresy out of narrative. But at the end of the day, you release a product, you have no control how it's played once you release the product. It's obviously designed a certain way. But however you get fun out of your heresy, you know, crack on. And everyone who goes there knows what they're getting into and knows what they could potentially be facing. So, yeah, it'll be interesting. But you can go to Element Games and you can purchase tickets there for that.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, should be. Do you want to take Miles?
Yes, I will take Miles from Lil Legend Studios. Miles is obviously your go-to man if you need anything painted, anything commissioned. It's a piece that you don't quite fancy painting yourself. But obviously he's very big on the Patreon scene. So if you're keen on supporting him or supporting, you know, just even giving him a couple of quid here and there just to keep him going, go and check his Patreon out. You can donate to the cause and help him keep churning out all the good work that he does.
Yeah, I can't remember if I said last time or not. I think I was about to do my non-metallic metal style thing with using his video, and it gave me ideas, certainly. One of his videos that was on YouTube.
Was that the one that cheats with metals?
It did have a metallic name in the thing, but the effect was fairly good. But yeah, so the principles I used from that, it gave me a good understanding, and then chatting to Neil to find out what colours that weren't metals that we could use to come up with an effect.
I just remember you saying, "Oh, I think that's a metallic colour." I thought we were doing non-metallics.
But yeah, it's all part of the fun, isn't it? Bless. But yeah, go and check out Miles on Patreon. And if you're thinking about lessons and stuff, if you subscribe on Patreon to a certain level, you get lessons within that as well. So that's all really good. Brilliant. So have you been painting, Neil?
Yeah, a little bit here and there. I've been painting Colin.
Yeah, so anyone who follows you on Instagram will have seen Colin, the Nurgle thing.
Yes, yeah, he's the guy. He's the little Nurgling off Mortarian's base.
All right.
And I was doing a bit of work on him, just painting him up, a bit of fun. And I posted it up like quite late at night and accidentally typed the name Colin into the sentence. I think I was saying I think I was trying to say he's coming along nicely. Oh, right. And I typed he's colling along nicely. Oh, right. And someone said, I like the way you've named him Colin, so therefore he has now become Colin the Nurgling.
And that's for a super secret project that we can't talk about, but it's certainly not heresy. How has that been taking up all your time? Have you been painting some heresy?
That's about it, really. Not a great deal. I've been doing a fair bit, but I'm getting into a very slow mode at the moment. I need to sort of try and kick it up a gear, try and speed up a bit. But not a great deal. How about you?
Well, the problem I've got is my flat has just gone on the market, and we're having people visit. So we're having people come round, and there's this constant. Well, anyone could pop round any day, really. So the flat has to be kept to a certain level of cleanliness, which means I can't just break out my airbrush and leave bits of night lying around or tanks and stuff like that. So I've been a bit limited. So I've cracked on with my Blood Bowl, but unfortunately not got a huge amount of heresy done. And I don't want to buy anything either until we've moved, really, because it's more models to move. And looking at all my books, I'm like, yeah, cool, they all fit in big boxes, that's fine. And I've got some model cases, that's good. I've got a lot of models that are just around on shelves and things. I'm like, they need to find some way to move them safely.
Models on shelves, they work fine while they're just there, but when you move them, it's another different story.
I might be begging and borrowing people you don't need that case for a while, do you? Can I borrow that case? So that's put me off it's kind of put me off doing too much in the heresy just because of the nature of having to do all that. I'm storing stuff at work at the moment and everything. It's crazy. But we've got I can't remember the name of it now. We're going down to Portsmouth, next week, or Southampton, one of the two, for the little Zone Mortalis game. So that'll be good. One dayer with a few people being run down that way. So that should be good fun. Break the Mechanicum out for the first time in a little while.
Oh, good.
A proper smash up. Probably get smashed up, but we'll give it a go. See what happens. See how many of the rules I can forget for Zone Mortalis.
I've never played a game of Zone Mortalis, but I do think I'd like it.
I think we're going to play more when the Necromunda boards come out, and it's they're widely available then. And it's not 3D terrain, but it works. It's fine. Yeah, I suppose it just gives you enough. It makes it a cheap way of doing it. Because I know quite a lot of clubs that have invested in Zone Mortalis tiles, but obviously that's it's quite an investment. It's not just cheap either. It's storage. If Zone Mortalis, we've got at the club, we've got a 3x3 area. We could probably the cardboard box we got could probably fit a few more tiles in it, but you don't want to get them damaged. And until I think when we finish painting, we'll get them properly varnished. But even then, that varnish will chip off, particularly at a club. And we've got a box that's, a few foot tall that sits in the corner and it's got the Zone Mortalis stuff in. It's like, most houses is not really viable to have that just stuck around. So, there is, there's something to be said for having an accessibility. Do we all want awesome terrain? Yes, we do. But some people don't like making it. Some people don't like painting it. Storage, cost, all those factors mean that sometimes it's worth just cracking out that. The other thing you can do is you can then go and purchase terrain to build up the walls as well, so that you can have it almost like a flat pack piece then, so it stores better. There's lots of options with that, and it'll be great when that comes out in November to have a real dig through that and have a look. But that's really cool. Lovely. Yes, brilliant. Should we get on to what's been going on?
Yeah.
Okay, should we start with the very heavy amount of Forge World that we've been getting? Doors! We got doors! Yeah.
Quite a lot of doors, actually,
Yeah,
to
decent
be fair.
amount. Yeah. Still not showing up on the latest releases page for me on Forge World.
Yeah, I thought that was a bit weird.
Yeah, So we got Dark Angels, Blood Angels, Sons of Horus, Iron Warriors. Same for Land Raiders, Iron Warriors. Yeah, it's cool. It's the start, isn't it? Now, I think I saw Andy Wardle post something like decals or nothing. But again, for people who don't like dealing with that, they're cool. They look cool. Yeah, they do come out, but I have no problem with that. Especially like the Iron Warriors one, I think looks fantastic. Iron Warriors and the Sons of Horus ones look fantastic on the doors.
Yeah, they do. They do look the business, don't they?
Yeah, really good. Not cheap though, are they?
No, but then again, you know, we've said it many times before. If you're doing a Legion, you know,
that's
you're going to
right.
spend a fair few quid anyway.
So they're coming with the rhinos. I was like, wow, they're expensive. So 3 rhinos and doors, it's £130. Yeah, or you can buy a Scorpius with the doors. And then that confused me for a second, but £14 for the. I was like, how are they doing that? I didn't realise you got all 3 rhinos, as it were. £10 for 2 doors. It's not too bad. I mean, yeah, it's not cheap, but that's well within kind of remit of, I just want to upgrade my stuff. At the end of the day, you're going to buy decals. They're going to cost you. They are spread out a bit more, but they're going to cost you money as well, aren't they?
They are indeed, yeah.
So, yeah, no, that's all groovy. What was funny while we're on Forge World is, have you seen the new Primaris tank?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, and I think it looks well. I want to see it in person, but I think it's got potential to look really good.
I really liked it. Then it was getting a lot of hate on the internet.
Yeah, well, to start with the leaked picture that came out, it does look a little bit like the front end's been stuck onto the back end, you know, kind of as a not in the design process.
Yeah,
but it's a Space Marine vehicle, and they're all a bit like that. But it was funny seeing the reactions. There's a lot of people getting into 40k that haven't played it before. Maybe they played Age of Sigmar and Warhammer, and they've had only a fleeting kind of relationship with the Forge World. And then all of a sudden they're like, how much is this going to cost? Oh, wow. This thing from Forge World is amazing. I'm looking at it going, yeah, you know, we're used to that.
yeah.
It just looks like something we're used to, and it's quite entertaining, and it's a big kit as well.
It does look nice. I quite like the look of it. I'm quite intrigued to see how that you know, that rear section with all the bits that stick out.
Yes.
I'm quite interested to see how that looks and what that actually does.
Yeah, and the hover technology is coming back into 40k, but we've got it in 30k already.
Yes.
Right? So you can, if you want to play, like particularly something like the Dark Angels, where they had that slightly different tech. There's potential, and I know there are going to be people listening to this going, "Oh, keep that out of my hobby." Yeah, cool, whatever. You know, you guys aren't going to do it. It's fine. But there are people out there who are like, actually, maybe as an alternative to another vehicle, I could use that, and maybe we're going to get more from Forge World as well. So it's all potentials in that to make something look really cool. But yeah, it just tickled me. On the other side of things, we've had Black Library Ruinstorm out. So this is the next book 48 or something. Oh no, where are we? I can't remember where we are now because I'm getting confused with the coming soons as well. But we've got Ruinstorm coming out. People are reading it and seem to be going down well. And Black Shields came out as well. I haven't actually got around to listening to that yet, so I need to order all that stuff. But we've had the Black Library Weekenders coming up as well, and there's some cool stuff being released there, not necessarily Heresy. But we have got confirmation that Ferrus Manus, the next Primarch book, limited edition, will be available in January, which will be very cool. And as we talk to Chris later on, we find out a little bit about what he's got going on with Jagatai, which has been, I think it's on Amazon, with a ridiculous kind of get information up totally early way of doing things. But that's really cool, and it's not long now actually till Fulgrim should be available as well for people who are keeping up with the Primark series. Yeah, really, really cool stuff. But that's about it for what's going on, I think. There was one kind of non-heresy thing that GW announced that got you a little bit excited.
Yes, there was. Yeah, so painting fanboy. They announced heavy metal masterclasses, and they did something similar to this a few years ago. It was quite a few years ago.
Yeah,
they hold a weekend, very much like they run up in Warhammer World, but this is purely focused around, I would say, probably slightly higher end painting. I know that they've stated on their Facebook that it's open to any level, but they're talking about some different techniques. They're going to have to do one on non-metallic metals. They're going to do one on blending and texture. And I think the first one is basically a bit of an all-round sort of getting you up to speed sort of weekend.
Yeah.
So yeah, they look quite exciting. I was quite, because we spoke about how I was looking to do more courses and bits and pieces. So I'll definitely try and get on one of those, because I've always wanted to have the ability to learn the heavy metal style, like the official way, rather than just trying to replicate it.
Sure.
So it would be great to sort of sit and watch how they do it and just get told exactly how they do it and the ways to do it or not to do it.
Yeah.
So quite exciting.
Yeah, I saw a number of people get excited about it, actually, from different kind of various groups that I'm friends with on Facebook. And because it's GW, because it's heavy metal, you are going to get a certain group who are like, oh, GW are doing a paint it means more because GW are doing it rather than the independent ones.
Yes.
So, yeah, and I know, because we were talking about this, and it's going to be all brushwork because it's the way GW paint.
Yes.
And
yeah, there won't be airbrushes.
No, I wouldn't have thought so. And actually, for me, where we've been talking, yeah, there is stuff I could learn. My next army, my 40k's gone on the back burner, but when I get around to doing them, the principle is I will do them the easiest way I can, which ironically I'm going to be stealing off some people who paint heavy metal style, but they're also doing it that style, it's not, for me, blending is something that I kind of do want to get better at, but it's not high on my list of priorities at the moment.
Yeah, sure.
And I feel that for me, I would get more out of doing an airbrush course, because again, hopefully that will help speed me up if I can actually do more with my airbrush.
Yeah, I think you've got to look at what you want to get out of a course, because I mean, again, the price of this course is £175 for the weekend, which obviously is quite a lot of money for a course weekend, but you are getting quite a lot with GW. They're really sort of,
so 2 lunches,
laying it on. It's a turn up and just attend sort of event, which I think is quite good. They're giving you the models, they're giving you the brushes, they're giving you the paints, they're providing the daylight lamps, they're providing the water, the pots, the pallets, everything you need, and then giving you lunch on both days. So in real terms, you don't really have much investment to go there. I mean, other courses that, the other one I went on, which was Richard Gray's course, there was like a predefined shopping list.
Yeah.
So it was like, you need a wet palette and you need these colours. If you don't have these colours, buy them from here. So if you had them all, great, because it didn't cost you any extra. But lots of people on the course had to go out and buy the colours.
Sure.
Because they didn't own them. So there's extra cost involved.
So when they say give you brushes, is that let you use their brushes?
No, that is they're giving you 4 or 5 brushes.
Okay, cool.
They're giving you all the artificer, the extra small, medium, and
GW prices.
And then a shade brush as well, I believe.
Okay, so after you've had your free food and free brushes, it's not very expensive at all. GW prices.
And your paints and your model, whatever you're working.
Yeah, I suspect it's use of paints.
It's paints to take away with you.
Oh, really? Oh, so they'll be limiting what you use. Okay,
yeah,
but that's
they're
still
probably
good.
only going to give you probably like 5 or maybe 8 paints at the most, I would have thought, because they're going to sort of say, this is how we do this colour, or this is how we do this
but we're all going to work on one colour so you can see what you're doing, how it's affecting.
Yes.
Yeah, that's understandable. So actually, yeah, when you look at it like that, even if you only class the paints and the brushes at 40 quid, then that's 135 quid's worth of course, if you will. How much was Richard Gray's course?
I can't remember. I think it was about 120 roughly. I might be completely wrong, but that's the sort of figure I remember.
Sure, and you are paying that premium because it is GW, and that you will do.
I had to pay for lunch at the Richard Gray's one, so again, you factor in your lunch as well.
Yeah, and they're decent lunches at GW as well. If you're allowed to use the staff canteen, which if there's a small group, because it's quite limited, isn't it?
Well, they haven't said numbers, but I've worked out the numbers from day 2. So day 2, they say they're going to give everyone an hour's one-to-one treatment, so they can really, I think, sit down and talk through your painting. But there's 2 people running the course, and there's 7 slots for one-to-one. So therefore, 14. I think there's 14 attendees for each weekend. Okay, cool. Have they said who's running it? Max and Aidan.
Okay, cool. Yep, and they can paint. There's no doubt about that.
I would say they're two of the best that are in the heavy metal team at the moment. So, yeah, definitely good guys.
I also wonder, because I remember we were watching Aidan paint, and the brush was never stopped moving between paint, water, tongue, model. It was paint, water, paint, model, water, paint, model, water, paint, model, like constantly. And I fear that I'll just get left behind with the speed I actually paint at. But,
I do think that with these courses, obviously they're not trying to make you the same speed as them, and I think they're often going to look to show you how to do it probably quite quick, but then give you quite a big time span to get it done.
Obviously, if you can reach that level, or if you can get your painting done quicker, you can receive more feedback on what you've done, is what I mean. You're getting more out of it.
I'm with you. Yeah, that's true.
So you can go possibly further than they did with the initial thing. So yeah, I know it's all good though, isn't it? It all depends what you want to get out of it, and it's relatively comparable to independent courses.
Yes, I think so, and I think with the with what you get and you're getting two really good painters teaching you some real sort of fundamentals that you need to know. I think it'd be worth the majority of people, if they're into painting, it's worth the money.
Yeah, cool. Was there anything else we were talking about, or I think that would be it.
I think that was about it, really, wasn't it?
Okay, cool. Yeah, we did have some feedback about the custodies. The bit we did last week. Dan at the club's considering selling his. Not because of what we talked about, really. More about the perceived, the perception that other players will have when you bring custodies to the table. And I think that's more come from reading other places and listening to other podcasts and things talking about it. And that's not to criticise those podcasts. You have sometimes that's there's a bit of a jesting in what you're doing, isn't it?
Yes.
You hear at the time, you bought the filth, no matter what they bought. Sometimes with certain people, you just say it anyway. However, sometimes that can have an effect on players, and if you hear it all the time. And this is something that Dan just began to think about, actually. If you do hear that all the time, that will affect you potentially, depending on how you are. Some people will just rise up to it and brush it off, and some people will be, I don't want to be that guy, and some people just don't want to have to deal with that kind of stigma. And that's, that's cool. And he's got 100 million projects on the go anyway. So it's like, well, do I need these, or can I hand them on and not have to deal with the issue of trying to work out how to regulate and everything else? Certainly, we had some Ben Williams, who's been mentioned on this podcast a few times, been to a lot of events around the UK. He's generally in agreement that a lot of people haven't considered how to play against the custodies. There is an attitude of, well, I've heard they're I've heard they're broken. And I'm sticking to that. And I think that's a Book 8 issue as well. I don't think the fact that there are some hazy rules in there as well don't help that. And you can't necessarily blame some people for having that opinion. But, it fits into that night thing as well. I think he agrees with us that actually the list in itself works very well. It's a well-designed list within itself. But using them as an army can have issues. He was talking about using some GM'd Zone Mortalis games and using a single Custodes as a boss. Which was quite a cool idea. And although he does say he keeps finding himself kind of rooting for the people fighting the Custodes, as a stalwart loyalist, that seems strange, but and has seen games where people can be worn down by what's going on, and as we talked about, that traitor-only problem as well, because it can be hard. The loyalists don't get to do it. They're always like, yeah, there's free Custodes armies, it's fine. And there are issues on the design of the list in terms of how it works against other armies, and that's you can do various things from that, but that's not what we're talking about really. And then just some comments about, as we said, him agreeing, which is good to hear. And I've had a couple of people kind of say, that they felt how we talked about it was right. If you put a flat reduction on total points, then you still need to be bringing a sensible list, because you can still just bring, okay, I've got 100 points left, but I've got 300, 400 points less, but I can still bring a 3-up re-rolling Tribune who can tank your Primarch. It's still an issue that hasn't changed, isn't it? It's just you've got less stuff around it. Does it make a fun game?
Actually, in some ways, makes it a little bit harder because you're limiting what they can attack, and if you've got that nasty combat guy who just gets into combat, you're like, well, you're never going to kill him now.
Yeah. And the other thing is, it can also limit the Custodes players to say, well, I've got less points than you, so I need to take something that can do this. Yeah. So I think there is a kind of having the lists, having people talking about the lists beforehand, having kind of buffs or debuffs given out to armies is a good way of doing it, but it does take time to get right. So it was a really nice, just to get that off Ben was good. I just wanted to read out a few bits. Probably didn't do it justice the way I read it out. But it's nice to hear, and we're going to get Ben on the show in a bit soon as well, because he's an intelligent guy and he's plays a lot of Heresy, and he comes up with a lot of alternative lists or slightly different things to do, which sometimes slip through the net of kind of, his list was harder than I thought it was when played well, obviously, because, as we say, playing is a major part of it. So it'll be good to see. I think he's toned his list down for London GT, or he's talking about toning it down for, not for London GT, for Blood and Glory, because he's coming to that as well, which is good. But that was cool. And if anyone else has got any feedback about the Custodes talk, I know a couple of other podcasts have dealt, kind of done their time on it recently as well. So there's a lot of opinions out there on different ways of doing things, which is good. But yeah, but talking about Blood and Glory, you can still come. You can still get tickets. So it's first weekend in November. It's rapidly closing in. If you do want to come, you can still do it. You have to get sorted and get lists in, but that should be good. It's not a huge turnout for it. But, again, the dates weren't confirmed and nothing was confirmed until quite late. So we'll go and have fun. There's 250 odd people playing different events over the weekend. GW are doing seminars. I'll be winning the Shadespire tournament Saturday night live on TV. That's definitely going to happen.
Is it Saturday night, the Shadespire tournament?
The main bulk of the tournament's on the Friday, and the two highest players will then be going to play on Warhammer Live on Saturday night.
Cool.
So that'll be live done, which will be really good. And then on top of that, the London Heresy's been announced, or the whole London GT. They've got 40k, Age of Sigmar, Narrative 40k, Heresy, Blood Bowl. I'm trying to think if they got Necromunda. It's the same venue. They're expanding out into the car parks and stuff. They're going to have food trucks there. They're going to have extra toilets there.
Oh, wow.
The London GT is going to be pretty baller this year. So I advise you, if you want to go for any event, 1st of November, be clicking online to find out when those tickets become available. It should be a good time. And I really hope that will get a lot of people there. Because it'll be plenty of notice in London. You know, all the Southerners who don't like driving can go to it.
I loved it because I could get a train.
Exactly, yeah.
First time I've ever been able to go to a hobby event and get a train.
Yeah, so keep an eye out for that, and I'll be retweeting it and Facebooking it as well. But there we go. I think that's the intro done.
Yes.
Right, we'll come back and we'll talk about how to use green stuff. Hello, now you may be expecting to hear a how-to segment here. Unfortunately, on the day of posting the show, something's happened to that file and we no longer have it. So what we're going to do is we'll do it again in the next episode, and this show will just be the chat with Chris. What that does allow us to do is get info from you. So we're going to be talking about how to use green stuff. If you've got any hints, tips, tricks, questions, then if you send them in, then we can incorporate that when we re-record the show. Apologies for that, and therefore for the shorter show, but unfortunately it's just one of those things and I can't recover it, which is a bit of a pain. But we'll have another musical break and we'll come back and you can listen to Chris talk all about scars. Joining us now, we have Black Library author Chris Wraight. Hello, Chris.
Hi.
How are you?
Not too bad, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, not bad at all, thank you. So, Chris has written a number of books. In Heresy, we're talking Scars, Brotherhood of the Moon, Path of Heaven, and various shorts as well, isn't there? Including Wolf King, which is fantastic. But should we go back to the beginning? We'll discover a little bit of Chris's journey. So, was being an author what you always wanted to do?
Pretty much, actually. Yeah. No. I think ever since reading The Hobbit was the first book that really got me hooked on reading, and I remember reading it when I was about 11 or 12 or something, and thinking this is just incredible, and literally not being able to put it down, and getting sucked into fantasy. That's the first exposure I had to fantasy books, really. And then much later, when I was a teenager, reading Ursula Le Guin's books, the Earthsea trilogy, as it was when I was reading them. And that was the book that really exposed me to the kind of writing that I thought was really interesting. So on the one hand, Tolkien got me reading, and I think Ursula Le Guin got me writing. And after that, I started having a go at trying to tell stories as well as read them. And pretty much, really did want to do it as a sort of profession at some point. And it didn't ever really think it was very likely, but just kept on plugging away and writing here and there. And eventually sent some stuff off to Christian Dunn when he was the submissions editor of that library. It was quite a long time ago.
Yeah.
And got into writing Warhammer Fantasy for them, initially short stories when they had open submissions windows. And then sort of moving into what was the old sort of Warhammer Fantasy Battle books, and then gradually creeping into 40k with Space Wolves and starting to write some more of that.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, I think The Hobbit was, I know I'd read various other slight fantasy stuff, but The Hobbit was one of those things where I don't think my mum's ever read it, but she gave it to me knowing that I'd love it. I think
that's nice.
There might be a lot of people like that around the world. Where
it's a fairly standard introduction to
it's fantastic, isn't it?
Particularly, for those of us who are getting on a bit. I think it's
Yes. Yeah, moving on.
I still think it's brilliant, actually. I think it really holds up. It's one of those, it's such a, unlike Lord of the Rings, which was hugely influential, but it's this sprawling, epic book. The Hobbit's such a tight story. It's very simple sort of quest narrative, which, I mean, if you read it again after having a go at writing books, you realise how deceptively simple and how well written it is.
Absolutely. Yeah, in fact, I got it on Audible, and listening to it reminds you of just how much it is a story to be read to you.
Yeah, I can see that, actually.
Yeah.
I haven't listened to it on audio, but I can imagine very much that's the case.
Yeah, it's Robert Englund. It's old,
Wow.
what's his name? Yeah, Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah.
And he's fantastic with it as well. So yeah, I can really recommend that if you get a chance. So yeah, I remember. So my first book of yours I read, was it Iron Company?
Oh, it might be. Yeah, that was.
I think that was the one. That was the one with the carriage, the gunners and all that jazz.
Blackadder, the Musketeers, and that was probably, I think, as actually my third book of that library, if I remember. But it was right at the beginning when I was sort of finding my feet in both writing books and writing Warhammer books, which is interesting because writing books is hard enough, but writing for a shared property like Warhammer, it has its own challenges, its own sort of benefits as well, but its own challenges. And, Iron Company was right at the start of trying to get my head around what we could do with the Empire, which is most of the Warhammer fantasy I wrote was set in the Empire. It was very much the kind of the bit of the old world that I enjoyed writing for.
Sure, and do my fanboy bit because Swords of the Empire it's available now. You can still go and get it if you want to read an Empire book. Go and read the double Swords of the Empire books because they're fantastic. And at that point, it was because you get to the point, we've talked about it on the show where you then start following authors you like, and that was the point where it was like, yeah, I like Chris, this is cool, and we moved into the 40k stuff. I do remember thinking with the Swords of the Emperor, doing the first one, which is Swords of Justice. I remember when I sat down to write that one, I felt like I got a few books under my belt, and up till then I'd kind of been doing relatively. I don't know what the right word is, kind of almost small stories in the sense that the scope wasn't massive because I was sort of trying to get the sense of what the world was like and how it operated. And I remember Sword of Justice was the first one where Nick Kime and I sort of sat down and said, right, we need to do something really big here. Let's try and do a really sort of broad tale with lots of politics and lots of fighting and lots of magic and then the real essence of chaos and all that kind of really cool stuff that you get in Warhammer. And so it was the first attempt really to try and do that kind of big, large scale story. And I'm really very fond of them, actually. I like to go back to books that I enjoyed writing and think about how they were. The two Swords books, the Sword of Justice and Sword of Vengeance. I've got fond memories of those. It's always nice when people come up at conferences and they've got one of those because it's nice to see them pop up now and again. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're fantastic. And then into the 40k as well. What was that a challenge for you going from fantasy to 40k?
Yeah, I suppose so, because I guess 40k is so unique as a setting. It's a pastiche. It draws from other things, but I think the success of 40k is it creates this really very distinctive environment that's so of its own type. And I think whereas Warhammer Fantasy, although it was different to lots of other fantasy properties, it had, I think, slightly less distinctiveness. It was set in a sort of real historical early modern world, at least the Empire stuff was, with fantasy elements. And so I think there was a bit more to kind of get grounded on before you started to try and explore the Warhammeriness of it. Whereas I think with 40k, it's so much its own thing. And has this really quite unique dark tone, this very grim dark, that I think it was a bit of a step up in terms of trying to make the imaginative leap to try and capture that. And I think the very best Warhammer 40k books are not necessarily the ones that are the most, I think the real skill of a good 40k book is capturing that setting and trying to bring it to life and make it so it's not like any other kind of science fiction or science fantasy product. It's got to be its own thing. But I think it's been a huge and very enjoyable learning curve. And I think like anything you learn by doing when you're writing. And I think when you're trying to tell stories in an environment, the way that you feel your way into sort of being comfortable with it.
Sure. Yeah. I think you're right. I think you can look at, everyone can look at books from 40k that they really like, and it's not whether they're huge or whether they're tight. It's the ones that do echo, like Hell's Reach. That's a war that's not going to go well right from the start. And
Hell's Reach is just utterly fantastic one. I think it's a really good example of that sense that you're that this couldn't be anything else. You're reading Hell's Reach, and I think Aaron, I read an interview that he did, and he talked about the early 40k artwork where you've got like the famous picture of the Crimson Fist being sort of assaulted on all sides, and this sense of backs against the wall that you have with Warhammer, that the good guys, to the extent they're good, are pretty much consistently losing.
True.
They're always in some utterly horrible situation, and capturing that sense, the heroism in Warhammer 40k is about facing up to almost certain defeat, and certainly a long, slow defeat, and trying to find heroism in that, and trying to find some kind of glorious resistance in that. And I think that's the great thing about the setting, that although it's dark, it has this, you can use that to leave all these fascinating stories.
Yeah, absolutely. So going there from then, at some point you get a phone call to be on the Heresy team. Is that, how does that,
the Heresy,
happen for you?
That was a bit later, yeah. I mean, I read a few sort of Space Wolves books for 40k, and then some other bits and pieces, and quite a few bits of short fiction. I think that the Heresy team, when I was sort of getting into writing 40k, I mean, Heresy hadn't kicked off that long after I started getting commissions from that library, so I sort of watched it grow from. I don't think anyone involved in the Heresy thought it would get as big as it did. I think that if you talk to people who were there right at the start, I think there was an element of, wouldn't this be fun to try out? And then it gradually got bigger and bigger and bigger, and more books got commissioned. And so by the time I was in the position where Nick and other editors, we were talking about doing some Heresy stuff, that was when the momentum had picked up, and it was this huge thing, and it generated all this kind of stuff that we never knew was there, or it was kind of taking stuff from the Visions of Heresy books. And so actually there was a fairly long period where I was doing quite a lot of that library, but there literally weren't slots in the calendar for Heresy books, because as you can imagine, everyone wants to write them. They're amazing to have a crack at. And so really the reason I ended up writing White Scars, was that was the one Legion. I think literally the only Legion that hadn't had someone do a story, like a novel length story with them in. And so by the time I was starting to seriously talk about, and Nick and others were sort of coming to me and saying, we'd like to give you a shot at this, the White Scars were the one remaining element really that hadn't sort of been touched on in the story at all.
Okay, cool. So what were your thoughts about the White Scars then? Because, I mean, was there a Legion that you would hope to have written about, or was the White Scars even in that conversation? Or were you a bit, oh, cool, White Scars, what do we do with them?
Yeah, it's I'm trying to remember now, actually, because I've done so much with them. I don't think I had any strong feelings about the White Scars. I think it's interesting talking to people who read the White Scars Heresy books, and over again you hear people say, well, I didn't really have any opinions about the White Scars, and now, I'm really into them, or now, they have an opinion, whether it's a good one or a bad one. And that, I think, is probably the same as my experience, really. It felt like a blank slate, really, to be given the opportunity to say, well, what is their role in the Heresy narrative? And the great thing, I think the great Heresy books, the ones that really stick in the memory, one of the things they do is they flesh out the Legions, and they flesh out the background, and give you an insight into these very strange and culturally diverse armies. And so immediately the first thing I started to think about was, look, well, what is unique about the White Scars? What makes them different to every other Legion that we've heard about? And one of the first challenges was to not make them like the Space Wolves, because the really easy thing to do would be to make a similar kind of barbarian archetype Legion to the Space Wolves. And I mean, I'm not suggesting the Space Wolves are simple, because what Dan did with them was anything but. They ended up being a really interesting and subtle Legion. But I think the danger was still there, that we'd end up trying to make them a slight pale imitation of the Wolves, rather than making them their own thing with their own history and their own culture. And so we really went back to basics and thought, well, Warhammer does always take these archetypes. So all the notable chapters, they have these archetypes in real world kind of warrior cultures. So you have the Ultramarines, the Spartans, and the Imperial Fists of the Romans, and all that kind of stuff. And I felt it was important that we carried doing that. I mean, that's a big part of Warhammer. It's always drawn from those sources. And so with the White Scars, we went back to look at the Mongols, back to look at some of the archetypes and imagery of the Far East and thought, well, how would that work in a Warhammer setting, which is pretty much a sort of Eurocentric setting in its origins.
Yeah.
And, this felt like an opportunity to say, well, look, there might be other things at work here. We might be able to do something to draw on those sources and make something genuinely interesting. So we spent a lot of time thinking about how that would work. And then the other key thing that we did really was we made a virtue of the fact that they hadn't been written about. And it wasn't, so in the books, it turns out that not only are they obscure in the real world, they're also obscure in the fictional world, that they have the same characteristics in the Warhammer universe as they did for me, when I was starting to think about them, that they are outsiders. They are pretty much unknown by everybody. And that becomes one of their defining features. And so the White Scars, to the extent they're barbarians, it's not so much that they have this feral side, or there's some aspects of that. It's more that they are unknowable and that they are beyond everyone's reach, and that they're always skirting around the margins rather than being in the centre like other legions, like the Ultramarines, are the complete opposite. So those are the kinds of things that we started to play with when we were thinking about developing them as a legion.
Yeah, and one thing we get with the legions, we get a lot of contrasts between legions as well. And kind of listening to you talk there, we've got a legion that's supposedly unknowable in the Alpha Legion, but it's a very different style, and so it works well having the White Scars, who are kind of almost honourably unknowable, and then the Alpha Legion, where it's always what are they up to, unknowable in that.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think that one of the things I find interesting is how the symmetries between sort of almost like there are lots of pair-ups between loyalists and traitor legions. I mean, the obvious ones, things like the Imperial Fists and the Iron Warriors. But you've got some all sorts of interesting parallels between some of the others. I guess you could say the World Eaters and the Space Wolves. Yeah, that kind of sense that it's almost like the Primarchs divided down the middle, and they got sort of corresponding pairs running down either side. And I suppose you might say that someone like Alpharis and someone like the Khan really don't fit into that mold, that they are very, except in the sense that you're talking about, that they're both these kind of unknowable outriders that end up kind of outside the schemes of both the main sort of armies on either side. And so I thought it would be quite cool to have the Alpha Legion in Scars, which was the first heresy book that I wrote, the full-length book that I wrote. And they do make an appearance, although, of course, it being the Alpha Legion, you're never quite sure what they're doing or why they're there. They do kind of turn up.
Yeah, absolutely. In that case, because as well, we've talked about, the unknowableness because we don't know much about the White Scars. Pretty much coming into the heresy, and as I've been a Warhammer fan since I was 12 or whatever, trying to immerse myself in it, and it was like, well, what did the White Scars get? Yeah, we know they're on Terra, and we believe they were around somewhere, Lexis, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, there were snippets, but that was it. Was it easy for you to expand on that with, probably with the editors, I'm assuming, trying to make it all fit together? Was it difficult to create a story?
There's almost nothing, I think, in the original background, it's fair to say. I mean, if you think about the three legions, the loyalist legions that were on Terra, the Imperial Fists, the Blood Angels, and the White Scars, there's a fair bit about the Imperial Fists. At least there's a fair bit about Rogel Dawn, because he's the Lord Commander, and for a large part of the heresy, we know that he's been doing certain things, and he's been in quite a lot of the early books. And certainly Sanguinius, we know an awful lot about what happens to the Blood Angels on Terra, because that's such a fundamental part of their backstory. And the Blood Angels are one of the big four Space Marine chapters, so there's a lot there. The White Scars, typically, there's very little. We know that they take the Lion's Gate spaceport during the siege. There's a bit in Visions of Heresy about Russ calling for aid from the Khan, and the Khan deciding not to go to his aid for whatever reason. Yep. And that was one of the snippets that we thought we need to run with this and find out what was going on there and try and beef that up. And there are odd bits and pieces, little sort of throwaway comments here and there. And I remember reading Graham's book, 1,000 Suns, and Yesuge, Tagutai Yesuge, who turns into one of the main characters in the White Scars books. He's at the Council of Nicaea, and he's one of the characters that speaks up on behalf of those who wish to keep librarians in the legions. And again, we thought, well, let's run with that. Why was it a White Scar there? Why, of all the people that spoke, in defense of the position that Magnus was taking, why was it a White Scar? That's interesting. And so that sort of sense of the White Scars being involved in the librarians and being sympathetic to the idea of Psychers and the legions that was something that we thought will make quite important, that they're one of those legions where they have a strong tradition of psykers. And again, we felt, well, look, that feeds in quite nicely to an idea of a legion of warrior mystics in a slightly more Eastern tradition, or at least drawing on some ideas from the Eastern tradition. That makes them unique as well. So all these things, once you start kind of trying to tease out what's already in the background, you can begin to run with the themes and find the ones that you think will make them sort of compelling.
Yeah, that's a strong aspect of not only Scars but some other bits as well. The way they look at the warp, and obviously you just told us where that started. I find it really interesting that the two legions who strongly warn about the warp for probably like the more correct reasons are the White Scars and the Space Wolves. And whether you talk about hypocrisy within the Space Wolves, that's a different thing. But they're talking about a controlled method, both of those groups, and yet they're both the quote unquote savage legions. Is that something that is just occurred, or is that maybe a more conscious decision in terms of being in
that's a really good question, because I think the Space Wolf attitude to sorcery, stroke, psychic power, stroke, kind of the world soul of Fenris is really interesting, and there is this very strange relationship that they have with the warp. That on the one hand, they're powerful practitioners. On the other hand, they don't see themselves as doing the same kind of stuff as the Thousand Suns, and they're very critical of what the Thousand Suns and other sorceress legions are doing, and that's something that starts out being a suspicion and becomes almost an obsession with them. And you can come to your own conclusion about what's going on there. Maybe the Space Wolves are flat out hypocrites. Maybe they are doing exactly the same stuff as the Thousand Suns, and they just are blind to what they're up to. Or maybe there's some crucial difference between the way that they engage with the warp, or the way they engage with their powers, and the way that sort of more straightforward and chaotic legions or chapters do. I think that's a really important ambiguity to have in the setting, and I think that makes the Space Wolves interesting. Certainly the White Scars for me are slightly different in that I don't think there's any accusation that the White Scars are they're hypocritical, because they're quite aware of where the source of the power comes from. The extent to which they're similar to the Space Wolves is they limit their investigations of the warp. There's this strong tradition in the White Scars that you have a moderate engagement with this stuff, and you use it for prescribed purposes. So, for example, they call their storm seers, the weather shamans. They use battlefield magic, but they're not like the Thousand Suns. They won't be delving deep into the origins of that. It's almost like they treat it as a weapon, so that we can use this, and we can use it like we use our swords, and we can use it like we use our jet bikes. But we're perfectly aware that if you go beyond a certain level, you'll start to corrupt yourself. And so these are dangerous weapons. These are weapons that you have to use with enormous caution. And so in that sense, the White Scars are very much like Space Marine librarians in 40k. They have this quite curtailed engagement with the war because they know how dangerous it is. Whereas I think that is slightly different to the Space Wolves, who have a much stranger engagement with all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's probably fair. Yeah, there's a definite respect with what they're handling from the White Scars. And, through repeated warnings, the Thousand Suns, bless them, don't quite get it. But, that's
that ended well for everyone.
I can just hear people now saying Magnus did nothing wrong. Bless them. Fools. And it's easy for a whole White Scars discussion to talk about the Space Wolves, because there is that strong, and which is addressed in the books as well. We are not the Space Wolves, and you yourself writing so much Space Wolf stuff and White Scar stuff is an interesting thing that's happened as well, and I think probably has helped you write the White Scars.
Yeah, I found writing White Scars slightly easier, actually, because the Space Wolves have been written by so many people in so many different ways, and they have this much longer history of Black Library books, various treatments of the Space Wolves, and like the Blood Angels and the Ultramarines, they are this iconic chapter in the 40k game. So there's a huge fan base that's very specifically Space Wolves, and there's lots of kind of history about how that chapter and that legion should act and the various things they should be doing. So I think as a writer, it's a tremendous honour to be able to write stories for legions like that. But it's also quite intimidating, because you think, there's lots of people with very strong views about how these guys should be, and I don't want to do anything that's going to kind of ruin it for people, or people are not going to like. So with that, with the Space Wolves, or if you're writing Blood Angel, there's always that slight pressure that you're trying to live up to something that's already gone before. Whereas the White Scars, because of what we were talking about earlier, the sense that they just hadn't had any exposure at all, it was quite a liberating experience. We felt, let's just go for this. Let's make this as unique as we can and give it as much flavour as we can. And then people coming to the White Scars, either they'll leave exactly the way they came, it's like, well, I didn't much care for them, or they're going to be really excited by this, and it might be the first time they've been excited by this Legion. And so that was actually quite thrilling to be part of that.
Excellent. Yeah, that's cool. One thing that, again, there's another thing that I was noticing. There's a big, the White Scars are dearly in honour, don't they? They have the thread running through the book, and highlighted in the short story afterwards, I can't remember what it's called, is they're making those decisions, and they will, stick by those decisions and carry on through with it. But it's not blind honour. So
yeah,
we have the Khan who's willing to ask that question in a galaxy where maybe most of the people there are guilty on both sides of not making a decision, of going with what they know, in inverted commas.
Yeah.
A lot of loyalists stay loyal because that's what they do. Rogel Dawn's never going to turn because it's not his makeup to even think about it. And some of them who fell probably fell very quickly, without full due consideration of what they were doing. But they can't.
I think that's right. I mean, I think the at the time of writing Scars, which was the first novel, there'd been quite a lot of, because the early stages of the heresy, I think some of the more memorable books really concentrated on the traitor legions and the traitor Primarchs, and they went to a lot of detail as to their decision-making process when they were choosing the side. Some of them very quickly, as you say, adopted the War Master's position and adopted the position of Chaos, and that was it from them. But some really had struggles. And Magnus is a great example of someone who took a long time to decide which way he was going to go. And in the end, his hand was forced in many respects. And I thought it would be interesting to really look at that from a legion that we know ended up being loyal. But maybe that was also the case on the loyalist side. Maybe, I mean, as you say, Rogel Dawn was never going to turn. The Ultramarines were never going to turn. Space Wolves were never going to turn. So you've got quite a lot of loyalist legions who loyalty to the Emperor was always going to be right down the middle. I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to if the Scars weren't like that? If they had real troubles deciding, and really not only just troubles deciding whose side to be on, but troubles finding out what was going on. Because sometimes I think we forget that the galaxy of the heresy and 40k it's incredibly hard to know what's happening because of the enormous distances and the fog of war and astropaths and it's not always easy to know from any fixed point in the galaxy what's happening light years away in other systems when you've got no reliable means of communicating with them. So the Scars start out their story not only being in the dark as to what has happened with Horus, but as they begin to get information about what's going on, for a long time it's very unclear to them who's in the right. And as we know with Warhammer, one of the great things about Warhammer in general is that there is this real sort of shades of grey between who's doing the right thing, who's doing the wrong thing. In fact, everybody is compromised, and the White Scars are no exception. And, without giving any spoilers, I mean, the large part of the impetus of their early story is them making the decision, which way they're going to go. And as you say, one of the key themes about them is that they keep an oath. So once they made an oath, they keep it. And breaking an oath for them is one of the most forbidden things within their cultural lexicon. So it's important for them that they make the decision right, because once they've made the decision, that's it. It binds them to the end of time. And there are some characters in some of the later stories who we discover who actually made a different decision, and they made the oath go in the other way. And what happens to them, hopefully, is quite interesting, because they can't go back, even though they know that the decision they made has turned out to be the wrong one. Yeah.
So this for me. So I'd say knew very little about the Scars beyond what was written in the obvious places, and reading Scars, I thought it was wonderful. I was really enjoying them, but it was that the facing up to that decision that they had made, and even though there are people there who are regretting that decision, following it through. when you look at some of the other characters we see in the Heresy who kind of whine and moan, woe is me, I've done that. That is not the way of the White Scars. And that's something that, some people will latch onto quite strongly, I think.
Yeah, I hope so, because that's certainly your description. I think is exactly right. I mean, again, but that's all going into any spoilers. One of the reasons that the White Scars differ from legions like the Space Wars is certainly at the beginning of their story, they are a legion that's completely at ease with themselves. They're quite happy being White Scars. They have a very clear role in the Crusades, which is these shock attack troops that are essentially allowed to rove ahead of the main war fronts. They're on their own. They're quite content. They're not a legion that's full of angst and like word bearers who are constantly worrying about stuff. They're just, happy going around killing. I think it's a phrase, laugh while you're killing, which sort of sums up their attitude. And as stories go on, that becomes harder and harder for them to sustain, because once you're caught up in the heresy, you can't just be self-contained and content with who you are. You have to face up to these kind of nightmarish truths about the universe and about the Imperial project and everything else like that. So it gets worse for them, and The Path of Heaven, which was the second full-length novel, sort of catches up with them as this process is underway. And they're a very different legion by the end of that book than they were at the start of their journey. So that was right from the start. We had that in mind, that you present legions during the Crusade era, and then during the course of the heresy, you show how they turn into their 40k counterparts. That's essentially what happens to all of them, whether they're traitor or loyal. And by the end of the heresy, we've seen how they become, as we know them, in 40k. So the White Scars enter the heresy process one way and they leave another. And the novels chart that progression. And again, that's something that we really had planned out from the beginning.
And I think it's dangerous when doing these interviews, because sometimes you sound like you're blowing smoke up someone. But I think there have been occasions in the heresy where that has happened, but it's been not thoroughly described, or something's felt unsatisfactory. And not many, and not to say they're bad, but there's been questions left after it. And I think the best books are the ones where those questions are deeply answered, and alongside people like Dan and Aaron, I think you do that pretty well. We're going to have to get you on to talk about Space Wolves at some point, because Wolf King, I won't go into the details, but we see Liam and Russ, having to stop and take stock of what's going on, of what he's doing, of what his legion's doing, and to deconstruct kind of himself and his legion. And it was really interesting to see the kind of the reviews of that afterwards, where a lot of Space Wolf players were not happy, and a lot of other people were not happy. And I think there's a bit of machismo in that. I think it's a bit of not wanting to have kind of to be seen as weak. But I actually find that such an interesting part of the character, but also such a strength of a character.
Yeah. I think one of the things you learn as a writer within a setting, and one of the things I've learned is that you have to tread very carefully with legions and chapters. You have to tread very carefully with any faction that people maybe play on the tabletop or have a very long engagement with as part of the lore. And I think there is a tendency sometimes for people to think a good story about a certain faction is when that faction wins, and when that faction does extraordinarily well. And that's obviously true. And I think it's important that we tell stories that everyone has their sort of chance to shine in the sun and do well. And that certainly in the heresy background, every legion is capable of immense feats, and there aren't any bad legions, there aren't any poorly performing legions. But as a writer, I find it interesting looking at, legions really going through the mill and having how they respond to real bad times and how they respond to things that are collapsing around them and aren't going their way. And so the idea with Wolf King was to show the Space Wolves at their lowest ebb, or certainly a low ebb. And one of the reasons as a writer that was interesting, because I'd written in 40k previously Battle of the Fang, which was one of the great Space Wolf victories in the 40k setting, where they'd been performed beyond all expectations, were immensely heroic and won comprehensively. And so I think from a writer's point of view, you tend to sort of see things from the point of view of all the aspects being covered. Like I understand from a reader, being dissatisfied by a book where their Legion does badly, or if they feel they didn't perform as well as they should have done. I think there's always going to be a little bit of that, but I think it's a good thing for the writers to be exploring what happens to factions when they don't win, and when they're faced by either certain defeat or their own frailties or their own conflicts, and how they deal with that. And certainly the intention with Walking wasn't to show the Space Wolves losing. The intention was to show them kind of introspective at a very low ebb and looking into themselves and saying, well, what are we doing now? You know, we've been these executioners. That's a role that's been thrust upon us. It's one that we've taken up. Is that the way we want to carry on, given that it's brought us to this place? And the way that they respond to that, again, going back to this idea that heresy stories are driving all the legions towards what they will become as 40k chapters. And we don't hear in the 40k universe so much about the Space Wolves being uniquely executioners. We do hear a lot about their prowess as warriors and their prowess on the battlefield, but it's a slightly different thing. And so books like Wolf King are a sort of attempt to bring them from what we saw in Prospero Burns step by step towards what we see in a book like Battle of the Fang in 40k.
Sure, and yeah, there is a big journey for that Legion to go on to get there as well. But and I feel it's when you see the lowest ebb, and then you see them rising out, then that rise becomes that much more important, that much more meaningful. But there is, I think sometimes, you don't want to see your the weaknesses shown. You want to be all macho with it. But we won't talk too much more about the Space Wolves. It's easy to do with the White Scar. See, we're doing it again. It's happened all their lives, unfortunately.
Yeah, poor guys.
We had one thing you did do with the book. We had this real division. You did this. I mean, it's been done a fair amount in the Heresy. We got the Terran aspect and the native aspect and the way they fight, their approach to war and all that. Was that a definite forethought of your way in breaking up to tell the story of the balance of the Legion, in which way it wanted to fall in the Heresy?
Yeah, very much so. I think lots of the Heresy stories have introduced outsiders into the story so that it's a common device, so that you can explain the cultural features of a legion or a group or whatever, and because there's a stranger in the story. So in Prospero Burns, we have Caspar Hauser, who is looking at the Space Wolves, and then for example, I'm just trying to think of an example. So someone like the First Heretic, you have all sorts of and there are remembrances throughout the Heresy. They're the eyes of the reader in lots of cases to show how these legions work. I didn't really want to have a remembrance, so I thought that been done, and so what we adopted was that we'd have, in the very first outing of the White Scars, which was Brotherhood of the Storm, which was a novella that was originally limited edition and then became general release, we'd have a Terran and a Chigorian who are thrown together. They're both Khans of their companies. And because there was this cultural clash between them, it's a way of introducing what the core elements of the White Scar mythos is. Because the Torgan, who's this Terran White Scar, is almost as unfamiliar with the habits of the Legion as we are. Yeah. And he's a much more conventional Space Marine when we first encounter him. And Shiban, who is his counterpart, when they come to fight together, they have this very uneasy relationship, which is largely based in the first stages on their way of war. That the Torgan has a way of warfare which is much more like a straightforward Space Marine Legion. That he's very strategic about goals and objectives. That they'll take an objective and they'll fortify it, they'll make sure that it's all secure, and then they'll move on. Whereas the White Scars are, they're very different attitude to war. On the one hand, they're much freer about their warfare, and they're much happier just to sort of treat it almost like an art form, and to go much more quickly at objectives and be much less careful about securing them before they try and find the next one. And that, obviously causes tension between them, but at the end of the story, both of them can see that there are advantages and disadvantages to the approach. And that mirrors, I think, the case for a lot of legions in the Crusade era when they're trying to meld these two very different approaches. So they've got all these legionaries that were created before the Primarch was found. And then when the Primarch's found, the homeworld culture then gets introduced into the Legion. And it either completely destroys the Terran input, or it doesn't do very well against it, or there's some kind of mingling of the both. And I think with the White Scars, what happens is you lose that Terran impulse over time. Yeah. And you end up with a very Chigorian Legion. which is what we get in the mainstream of the heresy story.
Yeah, they're a very stubborn, strong culture that kind of overrides what's coming through. Yeah, that's really cool. I was just looking through, and I forgot how many characters are in this book, really. There's a lot of Primarchs, yes, I'm not in it a huge amount. A lot of characters listed, and then, of course, Malkador the Succulite, and you've done the Succulite as well, and how is it approaching him as a character? Because we get some real insights from him.
Yeah, he has a sort of from memory. This is Scars, I think. He has a relatively short. I think there's a scene with him and Rogel Dawn and Valdor when they're talking about the various Primarchs, and at that point they're unclear as to whether the Khan is a traitor or not, because again it's this problem of communication, problem of knowing what's happening, and also just he's never had this great reputation for being someone who takes orders in the way that Russ has, or Gullivan has. So Malkador has this sort of role as, along with Dawn, at that point he's trying to hold things together, and he's trying to kind of order the Imperium at this time of incredible crisis. He knows a lot more about the origins of the Imperial Project than anyone else on Terra, apart from the Emperor, who is inconveniently underground fighting large grizzly bears. So, Malkador is this quite important character. Because he has a unique perspective on the Primarch project and the origins of all this stuff. So even Dawn doesn't know as much as Malkador does about what's going on. There are a couple more stories as the White Scar sort of arc continues where Malkador pops up again. Yeah. He comes up in a short story I wrote, I think last year, called The Last Son of Prospero, which is a story set on Terra. And that's actually when the White Scar get back, and it ties up one of the sort of supporting storylines. So he comes and goes within this setting, but I think that's partly because he's so interesting. Yeah. And he's such a suggestive character, and it's very unclear what his origins are and why he's working with the Emperor, and it's very unclear how old he is and what he's done before the crusade kicks off. So getting him in stories is always fun, because I think he's one of the best elements of the Imperial mythology.
It's also hard to understand exactly kind of his relationship with the Emperor and how much of that plan he fully understands, because we see some very personal kind of opinions from him, don't we?
Yeah. I mean, my own take, and this, is a personal take, so I don't think any of this is really sort of hammered out in the canon, but I think he understands an awful lot. And I think his insight into what the Emperor's doing is very acute. And one of the tragedies of Malkador is that as things begin to sort of go off the rails, he's one of the characters that knows just how much is being lost through all of it. Whereas for some of the Primarchs, this will be a war, and it's something that they need to win, and it's something that's tragic. And Malkador, I think, has more insight into just what an opportunity has been lost by the fact that the project of Imperial Unity is not going to go ahead as it was planned. I actually was very lucky. I had an advanced look at a script that Laurie Golding has written recently, which has the Succulite, and I won't tell you anything about it, but it's another opportunity to look into his character and what he thinks about the war, and some real sort of Easter eggs about where he comes from and what his relationship to the Emperor is. Of course, nothing is explicit, but it gives that sense that he's a very interesting and intriguing part of the background, because it's never quite clear how he entered the story, but once he's in it, he's got about as much understanding as anyone else does, including the Emperor.
I'm sitting here like an excited schoolboy, because if that's anything about the stuff that Laurie was talking about at Convention Secundus, that's going to be very cool. And I have no idea. I'm just going to say that I have no idea, but just the hint that it might be. And the Succulite as well, being so close to the Emperor, whatever that connection is. I've run or helped run a small business for my father with his money invested in it. Mm-hmm. And to see issues going on that I have to deal with, knowing it's not your responsibility. It's your responsibility, but you're playing with someone else's kind of investment, is a really interesting, weird, and actually quite horrible at times place to be. Yeah. Really horrible, because you can see how it's going to affect everything else.
Yeah.
He's in a very unique place in the Heresy, which is part of what makes him so cool as well.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think he's a really unique character. And in the way he for me, he embodies the non-military side of some of the Heresy action. That you've got Dawn, who is the military commander on Terra, in effect, alongside Valdor, in the Emperor's absence. And then you have Malcador, who's essentially he's almost like the civilian side of what the Emperor will be doing. He's holding everything together. He's the master of the administratum. He has his network of spies. He's obviously running this clandestine project with the Knights Errant and all this stuff that isn't straightforward out-and-out war. Malcador is really, in some ways, the most important linchpin that they have. And again, I think that's because, there's this sense of he really does get what's going on. And he's not just a general. He's also a politician and a diplomat and a scholar and all these really important things. And certainly in the audio that I did a long time ago on the Sigillite, one of the things we're trying to get across is that humanity is more, at least at that stage in galactic history, is more than just a machine for generating warriors and tanks and titans. That humanity aspired to be all sorts of other things, and it really, in the Heresy era, it was like that. And then as you get into 40k, it isn't, and that's because people like Malcador are no longer around.
Yeah, and he has that unique position as well, where he is that powerful, but he's not a Primarch. And the kind of the issues that can cause. And as I say, he's a great character. In reality, we probably done this interview like the wrong way round, because we're actually going to talk about scars in the episode that's out after this. Going to get Michael on and chat through that. And on reflection, timings didn't work out, but that's all. Right. So what I'm probably going to do is leave kind of the book chat there, except for it was written as a serial. Now,
it was.
Black Library haven't done that since. And it was their first real kind of thing, and it caused some waves at the time, and I was unsure, I must admit. How did that as a challenge? Have you ever written anything in serial format before?
No, not at all. It was great, actually. I loved it. I'd do it again. It was 12 episodes, and it was always written knowing that it would have a novel release, so it had to be written as a novel. But it was they released in those 12 installments. I think over Christmas, I can remember.
It was.
Certainly at the end of the year, it felt like it was.
Started just after a Black Library weekend, I think.
Right, so that would be November.
At that time, yeah.
And the great thing for me as a writer was that you had to think about having 12 cliffhangers, really, because the whole idea really is to be a bit like a sort of Flash Gordon style, tune in next week for the next installment. And I think just in terms of writing the novel, I think that was great, because it imposed quite a lot of discipline on making sure the story rattled along, because it needed to have all these beats, and quite a lot of them. And I felt that was actually quite good for the story. It meant that there were lots of points where suddenly the plot turned, or you discovered something. And so I enjoyed it. I don't think Black Library have done anything exactly the same since then. I mean, they've done with The Beast Arises a fairly similar exercise, which was slightly longer. But I think it was a book a month. Yeah. And they were 50,000 word, sort of slightly shorter novels. And there have been things like the audio series that have come out in installments. And my understanding at the time was that the reason it went out as a serial was only really so they could squeeze it into the schedule. It wasn't so much a thought of, let's do something. It was more that there was only, I think at that time there were 4 Heresy releases a year, something like that, maybe 3. And it was a way of getting a White Scar story onto the schedule without destroying everything else. And that might be wrong. I mean, obviously from a freelance point of view, I don't always have a great overview of what the grand scheme of things is, but that's certainly the impression I got. And it then was released as a novel, and I think that all the stories since then have come out as conventional releases. But I certainly enjoyed the experience, and I think if the opportunity came up again, I certainly wouldn't say no.
If I remember correctly, you were writing it as it was being released. Is that correct?
That's a good question. It's a long time ago. I suspect I was.
Yeah, I think because I seem to remember someone saying they knew how it ended, and it hadn't quite been finished.
I got a feeling. Yeah, I think that's right. Actually, I think it wasn't finished. I mean, what we normally do when we're writing Black Library books is we'll submit half the manuscript, roughly halfway along the process, and I got a feeling that at least half of it was done by the time they were starting to be released.
Yeah.
You have to ask Laurie, who was the poor guy who was in charge of trying to make sure everything got in on time. He probably lost a lot of sleep. But I think, yes, I imagine that it wasn't all finished by the time they started to release the first one. So there's this kind of extra pressure of getting the last ones out when you know you've only got a week or two to do it.
I can imagine. It's bad enough trying to write event packs and stuff for dates. I couldn't imagine writing novels. I'd be more of an Aaron than a Guy for sure. Okay, cool. Brilliant. Well, you've got a lot of other stuff. We've got all the Scar stuff in the Heresy. You've got your Space Wolf stuff. You've written the Primarch book for us as well, which is fantastic. And as I say, we'll probably get you back on to talk about Space Wolves, and all the 40k stuff. What have you got that's coming out? You've just done now I always get the wrong way round. The Carrion Throne.
Well, the Carrion Throne is fairly recent.
Yeah.
And that's an Inquisitor book set in 40k, and was set in what I guess we should start calling classic 40k, just before the Gathering Storm developments. But it looks forward to some of those events. So that was a great fun project. I really enjoyed that. That was an opportunity to go into a real classic Inquisitor story set on Terra. So you get a really certainly I went to town on showing the throne world in all its degradation at the end of the 41st millennium, which was really nice after having a few attempts at showing it in the Heresy era.
Yeah.
And that was just a lovely project because it was a real change of pace from Space Marines and the Heresy stuff. There aren't any Space Marines in it. And it's really a tale of an Ordo Hereticus Inquisitor and his acolytes uncovering a conspiracy on Terra. And it's much more of a sort of police procedural stroke sort of mystery style story, although there was obviously plenty of genuine Warhammer elements in it as well. So that was my sort of book release before last. The last one was so-called Emperor's Legion, which was a custodian's book and Sister of Silence, which is set slap bang in the events of the Gathering Storm, and that was a really interesting commission because it was a chance to try and tell a story that incorporated elements of all the things that you read in Rise of the Primarch or the other books. And that was my most recent release, and that was out, I think, last month. I think it was in September.
Yeah, I haven't got around to that one yet. That's on the Kindle, waiting to go.
Right.
In the list of books I need to read.
And then next up is the Khan Primarch's book, which has been written and submitted, and that is now sitting somewhere in Nottingham, being turned into pages, and that will be out at some point next year, I think.
Yeah, we're already up to, I think, January's Ferrus Manus has been announced for January, so we're at least probably March, April for that one.
I would have thought so, yeah.
That's cool. I look forward to that one. And I don't suppose you can't tell us anything about it then?
About the Khan? Well, I can. I presume I can. I mean, I thought it'd be a really nice opportunity, because all the Primarch's books are kind of set in the Crusade era, or at least Lost Part. And the idea is to show them at their prime, and not to be tied directly into the Heresy narrative. So I thought it'd be nice to do like a prequel to Scars, really. So the Khan's entry shows some of the things happening that get referred to in Scars, but we don't see. And there's an awful lot of discussion of the Librarius, which is a large part of their what they do with their interaction with the Primarchs before everything kicks off in the Heresy is largely to do with the Librarius. And so some of the things we were talking about right at the start of the interview, their attitude to the warp and their attitude to sorcery, their attitude to psychic power, that's a major theme of the book. And there's a very long-standing bit of lore. I think it's long-standing, but certainly there's a bit of lore which is saying that the three Primarchs that were most influential in setting up the Librarius were Magnus, Sanguinius, and the Khan. Yeah. So we get to see a bit of how that happens, and a few of the discussions which they have long before Nicaea, long before Magnus goes off the rails a bit. This is the beginnings of the Librarius and what the White Scars do within that.
Awesome. That's those little bits that we know. That's really cool to see those being fleshed out. This Primarch series is perfect for things like that. Things for the Lion versus the Wolf and all that jazz. Yeah, really good. And are we pushing it to ask about anything else?
No, I'm writing some Death Guard at the moment.
All right.
Again, that's 40k. And that is, again, set in the sort of current 40k.
Yep.
And that's a complete departure for me, because I very rarely write traitors. I've written Chaos Marines and things, but they tend to be antagonists rather than protagonists. This is a Death Guard point of view novel set in 40k, which is what I'm currently working on. And that will be out a long time in the future, because I'm still writing.
Sure, no worries. Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you were at the High Lords of Terror meeting.
Oh yeah,
yeah. So I'm not expecting anything to be said about that. But how was that? As you know, was it the last big meet you guys are having?
Well, I don't know if it's the last one. It certainly was a really important one, and I think it was. I mean, it was like all these things. It was exhausting, but very exciting, and. It was, I mean, because I'm a sort of relative newcomer to the Heresy series, but a lot of the guys who were at that meeting, like Dan and Graham and Gab and Jim, they've been there right from the start. And so I think for them, it was like, this is really, we're accelerating towards the end of an era. And it was just fascinating listening to a lot of the ideas that came out of that, a lot of the thoughts about how the series is going to culminate, because we know it's going to end at some point. And it was great. I mean, it was a long day. It was a real sort of writer's room kind of experience. We're hammering out all the various ways that we might take this forward and trying to allocate stuff. We had at one point there was an arm wrestle to see who'd write the Eternity Gate, and then Aaron got very angry, and then there was a fight, and then one of us died. Yeah. But apart from that, it was all good.
So that would probably be someone taking Jim on, I would have thought. Seems very voracious in his defence of wanting to do certain books. It's great. It's one of those things that's like, I can imagine certain people paying a lot of money just to sit in a corner of one of those rooms. Particularly people who want to write just to experience that kind of environment. Must be quite...
I mean, it's a fascinating experience, and like I say, there's a sense in which it's just fun to listen sometimes. I think all of us, as things have transpired, have ended up carving out bits of the heresy that we're most associated with. And for me, it is the White Scars. That's the bit. And of course, they do play a role on Terror. And for other authors, they've got like unfinished storylines, things like the Perpetuals and things like Legion storylines that we don't know where they're going to go yet. And so, I think to see how those things are going to get wrapped up and to start, moving towards that goal is very exciting.
Oh yeah, big time. Excellent stuff. Well, I think we're about done. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And hopefully we'll get you back on soon, and we'll chat about, some other stuff. There's plenty to be talking about, which is really cool. And of course, you're going to be at the Black Library Weekender as well.
Yeah, I am expecting to be there. Yes.
Yeah, excellent. So we'll see you in the bar there for sure.
Right.
All right. Take care.
Right, excellent.
Here we are at the end of another show. It's been good. Neil we'll be able to listen to half this show again.
Yeah, we will. It's nice when I don't have to do too much talking.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said in the interview with Chris, next week we're going to have Michael on to talk about the book Scars. And we'll be talking a little bit about the trip down to Portsmouth. So hopefully, that should be good fun, actually. The Sons of Heresy boys are down there, and Pete and that lot. So, yeah, gorgeous Pete. So looking forward to that. Dan and I are having a bit of a road trip down there and going out for a meal afterwards with the guys and then heading back home. Nice for a one day. It's a bit of a drive for a one day one, but, whatever. Things you got to do, to get games in.
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah, all fun. You need to get some more games in. We're going to have to sort you out.
I've made my pledge that I'm going to work at getting my Night Lords done, and I want to get them done for London Heresy.
All right, cool.
That's my game plan.
Good. Hopefully, that'd be really cool. Because I think Tom, who helped out, he's working on his 1,000 Suns for Blood and Glory as well. Or at least to an acceptable level, and then going back and really working on them more. So it'd be good to have, and the beauty of the way we run events. There are issues with it we need to iron out, but Tom can play in them and kind of still feeding all the data for me as well, which is pretty cool. So yeah, looking forward to that. So that's a reminder for London Heresy. If you go onto Facebook, you can find it, London Heresy 2018. I think all the London, you can Google London Grand Tournament Warhammer, and it'll come up with the site with all the information and all the links that will be on there. I've got to finish writing the pack, or the first part of the pack anyway, so that can be put up on November the 1st. And yeah, be quick, because again, I think it's a case of there's X amount of space, much more than last year, but there's X amount of space, and this year we've got Age of Sigmar, 40k narrative, Blood Bowl. Blood Bowl could be huge. It doesn't take up much room, but they get a lot of players at big events.
And I've seen a lot of different peak clubs pushing the GT as well. I know that my local, the South London Legion, they've been saying about getting people down to.
Yeah.
So, I think the tickets will go quick.
It'll be a big Age of Sigmar event as well, I think. The only thing that will stop it being too big is the biggest Age of Sigmar event so far had to move and are quite near it in terms of time, which is unfortunate, but, that's life. But, yeah, and I could see them adding more events as well. I don't know. I'm not involved in that organisational side of things, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's Shadespire there and what have you, because why wouldn't you? And they've got, what you will have to do is there is an email that's gone out. If you want to be on the email, you can go to the site and sign up. If you really can't work it out, drop me a message and I'll try and put something in the show notes, actually, if I remember. But, you buy a ticket, much like the conventions in America, you buy a ticket to enter, like, the convention, and then you buy your tournament tickets on top of that. Now that £10 entry fee allows you entry into the painting competition. So there's a painting competition this year. So Neil,
Excellent.
Hopefully, will be entering that, and that'll be really good, because last year, a couple of the 40k armies, people had travelled from Hong Kong, I think. Some of the nice armies that won from, so hopefully
because last year it felt a bit weird, didn't it? Because obviously the heresy side, we had our own sort of way that we judged our. I was judging the painting of the armies, and we were putting together a list. Whereas they then also laid out all the 40k armies.
Yeah.
And did a separate thing. So.
Oh, I'm sure we will be doing that as well. But there is a generic, so you can come and enter this painting competition. I don't know, I haven't looked up about it yet, but I'm sure there's categories. And you can enter models. There are seminars going on. I think they're getting some Slayer Sword winners in to do some seminars. I don't know all the full details yet, because I've been wrapped up in doing so many different things over the last couple of weeks. But there's a lot going on, so head on over London Grand Tournament, and find out what's going on. Zach and the team are going to do good things again. I'm sure of it.
Excellent.
Yeah, brilliant. Again, any feedback about today's show, send it over, because it's always good to get your other tips and tricks on things like that.
Or if there's anything that you think I'd really like some help with this or that, just let us know. And
it doesn't have to be kind of the more hobby side. It could be anything to do with, the game, the books, let's say the hobby. There's lots of different things, and sometimes when there's two of us talking here, sometimes your other people's minds work in different ways and want different help with that. So feel free to send us ideas, and we'll try and work through them. And you can send them to greg@theimperialtruth.com
or neil@theimperialtruth.com.
And of course, if you want to follow the Twitter, Imperial_Truth, or act Child of Fang.
And I'm at Neil Paints on Twitter and Instagram.
Yeah, and if you are interested in Shadespire at all, the episode of Fanatic should be releasing about the same time as this one. I'll be talking through Fanatic. I'll be talking through Shadespire in that, and then hopefully next week, next episode, should I say, we'll have Necromunda. And actually, fingers crossed, there will be an episode with Rob Symes from X of Warhammer Live as well, who's got a project going on that people may be interested in. And we'll try and have a chat with him, but I'll share that on the social media as well. because that's cool. And yeah, I think we're about done. I don't think we're going to keep you too long in the wrap up. Unless you've got anything else to say, really, Neil.
Nothing from me, Greg.
Awesome. You have been listening to The Imperial Truth.